You are listening to Radiant Creators, a collaborative project composed of people whose passion, purpose, and dedication requires forging their own unique path of empowerment and livelihood. A radiant creator isn't making a living, they are living.
Duncan Laurie, welcome to Radiant Creators. And this show is really going to be about the groovy world of Duncan Laurie, Radionics, and Dragon Lion Studios. Duncan Laurie is one of the individuals who I always find is challenging. This is one of those moments where you're starting the interview and you're going, wow, I don't know where it's going to go, but it's going to be good, because some people are easy. They've done one thing. And so you can say, okay, tell me about that one thing that you've done. But Duncan Laurie, he's an expression of life. And he's done quite a lot, and he's doing quite a lot. And so we'll just try to get a bit across as to, you know, who this Duncan Laurie character is, what Radionics are, Dragon Lion Studios, and a bunch of stuff. Now, something I've not done before, and Duncan actually recommended this, was, why don't I just write down the intent of the interview? And I think I'll make that a habit in the future. And I just thought, well, since Duncan's got such a plethora of stuff, let me just mention the intent that I have for the interview, things we might get across, we might talk about. So, passing on inspiration so people can connect to their authentic soul signal, especially the artist lost in popular culture. Artists can be inspired to make machines, again, that change, purify external dynamics. What does the artist who uses radionics or any medium create with that machine? Experience of artistic integration with radionic devices or any other artistic medium. A transformational experience of consciousness is demonstrated that isn't a product. And also, thousands of years of European architecture and art has gone to shit in a few generations. Let's talk about that. So there's some intent for the interview. And for an icebreaker, something fun to get the conversation going. Analog versus digital. In our world right now, we're looking at digital all the time. And I'm noticing it just seems to make people unable to slow down and read paper anymore, or do hobbies, you know, garden, do things with their hands, do woodworking. We're kind of becoming these like ADHD scatterbrains in the digital world, and we're losing the analog experience of life. So do you think we're negatively affected by too much digital these days? And how you doing today, Duncan?
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. I don't think there are a lot of people that want to tackle my topics, but you're certainly, you get credit for it. I give it to you, man. You know, that question that you just brought up. I have 3 daughters, 20, 22, 30, and 50.
Wow, I'm 50.
Yeah, and this issue of the digital invasion of our minds is an important one for any parent. It's very, very insidious, and I find for myself, it's incredibly addictive. The notion that technology can begin to take over your nervous system to the point where if you're deprived of it, it's like an alcoholic who can't get a hold of some booze. It's definitely scary, and that's part of what we're talking about here. Is what is it that gets under our skin about this? It can't just simply be the imagery involved, because that's always changing. Is it the medium? Is the medium hypnotic to such an extent that we can't let go of it for a minute? This is a good question. I don't have a clear answer for it at all for you or your readers, your listeners, but I think it's something that we'll get some insights into as we continue our discussion.
That sounds good, because yeah, I thought it'd be a great one to sort of just put out there, because and we'll talk about this as we go along also, but you know, one of your, well, in creating rock music, the real thing with rocks,
Right.
you did you did buy, Henry Platt did create that amazing amplifier and speaker system. And I love the vacuum tubes in it. And when I was a youngster, my dad was an electronics technician and we had vacuum tubes around the house. And I really feel,
Yeah, me too.
yeah,
Yeah.
I feel fortunate to have had that experience, because there's something I really felt as a little kid, that those vacuum tubes were living beings. They were little elementals, they were little beings. And so if you had an amplifier, and we had some amplifiers for music that would have just these rows of vacuum tubes, and as you hit different notes, different sounds, different octaves, different ones would light up to different degrees. And I just went, wow, there's these little beings in there that light up and do what they're supposed to at the right time. And I just thought that was my my initial experience in life, really was with seeing analog electronics. Even though it was electrons, of course, it was analog. It wasn't totally solid state, and it just gave me this organic feel.
Well, it should. It's carbon based. I mean, analog is made out of the same stuff we are. Digital is made out of silicon. And in the analog old radios, they pulse. I mean, the music and the energy flowing through the tubes creates a pulsation, just like we have a pulsation from our heart. So there's a lot more commonality intuitively, sort of aesthetically, than what we get from digital, which is very, very much like neuronal activity. It's electrical. So there you go.
And I think if we could measure, if we had sensitive enough instruments to measure, you could actually see a little, just like around the human body, have that toroidal energy flow. You can probably see a little vacuum tube has its own little toroidal energy flow. Maybe,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and let's go on to your book, because Duncan Laurie wrote an amazing book. Now, he's done a lot of stuff, but where I heard about Duncan Laurie was from Masaki, someone we've had on the show, and he makes orgonite pyramids. They actually makes powered orgonite pyramids and orgonite pucks and orgonite pucks, especially for doing radionics and such. And he mentioned your book, this one right here. And I went, oh my goodness, look at that. And I thought, I better get that. And so I thought, this is someone that I definitely want to talk to, because there's just so much going on here. So, and that's why I say with Duncan, he's done so many things. We're just going to chatter, and we're going to eventually cover a couple different pieces that I want to talk about. It's going to all kind of meld into one big, beautiful thing, and we'll just keep at it until we get there. So tell us about the creation of this book, because it goes along with, of course, your Dragonline Studio, which is this amazing, place that you guys created, that amazing things happened. Maybe that's a better place to start. But since you are an author and you have written this book, tell us about this creation.
Well, The Secret Art is a book that is really written for artists and creative people. And I want to go back to where I first became aware of what I was trying to write about in the creative art, in the secret art. When I was a graduate student at fine art, I used to work in my apartment, and I was carving stone. And I would carve, and it'd be like all thumbs for maybe 5 or 6 hours. I mean, literally, you hit your thumb with a hammer. It's not an easy process to get used to carving a piece of stone. And then there came a point just prior to being totally exhausted where every single thing started to go right. My hands moved seamlessly. My mind didn't interrupt the flow of activity that was leading me to do the work that I was doing in a much more efficient way. I wasn't second guessing myself. I wasn't making mistakes. I was in a state of physical exhaustion, but mentally I was completely free. It was just I'd experienced that. I'd had that feeling sometimes being very drunk. And just before I passed out, I had this tremendous lucidity that went on for maybe 15 or 20 minutes, and then boom, you're gone, right? But in this case, it was a creative process that was, it was almost like the whole time I was working, I was battling inertia, my own limitations of my mind, my body, and everything that was telling me that either I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing, making art, or I couldn't do it. I wasn't good enough to do it. I wasn't capable of doing it. And therefore, I should stop and go do something more productive. So all of those thoughts, all of that self-critique suddenly just vanished in a moment. And with it came a tremendous influx of energy, physical energy, mental clarity, just a profound sense of happiness with what I was doing. Now, I had no basis at that time in any esoteric thought. I'd had an artistic education, and I was interested in literature. I was writing a little bit, but there was nothing that would have led me to believe that a change of consciousness like this was something that I could expect from my life. This was a intuitive discovery of coming from within myself, not from the outside. So as the years went by, and as I developed more and learned more, I tried a lot of things to learn more about this, how to control it, how to bring it forward when needed and not just at the point of exhaustion. What kind of energy were we talking about? What impact does this have on life? The nice thing about sculpture, you don't have to think to do it. You don't have to engage with any intellectual discourse with yourself. There's no biofeedback process that involves a sort of cerebral judgment. It's really slow. You were talking about how we're losing touch with the analog world. Well, you can't do much that is slower than carving a piece of stone with a chisel. And if I jump forward a little bit to where the book starts, the oldest form of art on the planet that we have, and there may have been older ones, but the oldest one that is really everywhere to be seen are cupules. Now, what is a cupule? A cupule is a sort of a soft indentation in a stone, like a cup. If you were taking a flat piece of stone and you carved out a little cup-shaped space out of it, that's called a cupule. Cupules are a prehistoric art form that we have them in Australia. We have boulders the size of Volkswagen bugs that are covered with cupules that go down into the earth, which allows them to be dated to 50,000 years old. We have cupules in places like India where they've had organic growth over them. They've been dated much older than that in caves. We have cupules in every continent that man has lived prehistorically. So we're talking about a time span that could be as old, if you believe in some of the research, it could be 400,000 or 500,000 years old, not just 50,000 years, which is the area of Neolithic art that we're familiar with from the caves in Europe and other places. So what caused people to carve these cupules in stones and to make hundreds of them across dozens of boulders in a field? Or in the case of one we have in a river in Massachusetts, not far from where I live, there's one in the middle of a stream. What caused somebody to sit out there on that rock in the middle of the stream with probably with another rock, and just bang away at that stone until it was covered with all these little cups, right? There's not a utilitarian reason for this. And especially now they've found recently some Neolithic sites where the cups are actually on the ceiling. So you can't say, well, they were for cracking nuts, or they were for putting in paste or ochre coloring, or making different things with chemically. They're just simply a mystery. And a lot of research has gone into them. So it's not an unstudied phenomenon. So think about that as we go ahead into the rest of the discussion, because that's where it begins.
That's where the book begins. And so we could say the Secret Art of Radionics, really, it started with, cave paintings. You could say hieroglyphics really are machines, and these cupules are sort of a form of could be a form of like dots and dials, because like here in the book, we've got a 13th century device, Radionics device, and and the craftsmanship on that, and when it was made, I think about this would have taken effort to create.
It's made out of brass.
It's made out of brass. So somebody, to me, would have had to have a reason to build that. I mean, it's a machine that does something. And you mentioned the cupulas, and so in your book, it's one of the things that really struck me too, as we look at the dappled horses here. These are 25,000 BCE, and so we see these little guys here, and so it really seems that, and we can define what a radionics device is for people, but before that, I mean, it does seem that these cupulas could have been radionics devices. These I guess it could be said that there's a possibility that they were carved to be machines that did something, that did carried forth the intent of the person who was carving it. Same as when you tune a radionics dial.
We'll go back to those Neolithic horse paintings from the caves, right? What do you see there? You see big dots, right? Mm-hmm. And those dots on those horses, what they have, even archaeologists studying these caves feel that the animals that were painted on the caves were effigies. That if the hunter wanted to prepare himself for a successful hunt, he went into the cave in a quiet, introspective way. He put a painting of the animal he was looking for on the cave as a totem, and he used that to direct and focus his intent, which was to go out the next day and to find the animal and capture and kill it. That's one theory about this, but it makes a certain amount of logical sense based on the way we function. What is common with those horses in a cupule is the dot form. And the dot form exists in that 12th century geomantic device that you showed before. The dots exist everywhere, right up into the screen we're looking at, which is composed of dots, if we examined it microscopically. So there's some fascination with the dot that probably represents, on a fundamental level, identity, right? So if you're a primitive person and you're seamlessly interrelated with nature, and all of a sudden you walk into a clearing in the jungle and you see a rock that's had a cupule or a series of cupules carved into it, what would be your reaction? It would almost be like looking at, seeing that someone else in the world had asserted their identity. They had asserted their sense of beingness by carving this little thing into the stone. So this little cup, right? So it's almost like, wow, it's like if we walked through a city today and found a 40-story crystal, right? What would that mean? I mean, it would be something that was unprecedented in our knowledge and architecture and preconception. So what I'm saying is that there's a nexus between identity and creativity and the sacred. And when they all come together, you begin to understand who we are and why we're here, right? So when I was trying to write about radionics, the book is about a technology called radionics, but it's easy to get lost in pictures of dialed instruments and theories about why they should or should not work. What's really important is to understand it from the back, from the front to the back, not to look at the devices as the end product of a long series of aesthetic and cerebral explorations into consciousness and how consciousness can be employed to empower ourselves as human beings, to give us another tool in our bag for the future, to make us a little bit more confident about who we are and what our capabilities are. So that's why I want to approach radionics from the artistic end and not from the technological end, which is where most people that are even familiar with it start. They look at devices. There's a lot of devices in this book. But what I want to talk about is, where do you get this energy, you see? And how can you get more of it? And can a device or creative process or a tube amplifier or something else give you access to this in a way that people around you, scientists, thinkers, inventors, businessmen, are not letting you know about, right? Is it so simple that anybody can get it? Or do you have to go through General Motors, right? Or Tesla?
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that at the beginning, they didn't have any place to get it. They had to get it by hitting a rock with another rock. And something happened there that has lasted anywhere from the present day back potentially 500,000 years. The same image, the same practice, right? So that's where we're starting. Whoops, I can't hear you.
Sorry about that. That was me. There's one picture from the book that I like that does go from your dots, to your dials, and
Yeah.
what I like about the book, so that's Laferasi Cave, 60,000 BCE, and then the next one is the first Abrams radionic oscilloclast, which is talked about a good deal in the book. And I'll just show this so people can see it if they're listening, or if they're watching, and they can see how there's just this uncanny similarity, you know. Well,
with those let me just explain that
yeah, there you go.
The Abrams device, the circular dot patterns, is actually a capacitor. That's a device, an electronic, early electronic device, which is a way of calibrating the energy that device is measuring. So calibration, what does the guy do when he paints the horse and he defines it? He's calibrating it in his own mind. He's putting it into a context that he can manage it. What does an electronics designer do when he builds a circuit? He is calibrating the energy to perform a specific task. That's what the circuit drawing defines, and that's what the circuit, when it's built with its component parts, functions to do. So,
um, Neil Kramer, a modern day philosopher, I think is what he calls himself. I remember once at a lecture of his, he said that he didn't used to get what symbols were. So if you look at sacred geometry, we can look at there's many symbols through time,
right.
and he was saying that symbols ultimately are machines that do things.
Yeah.
You know,
They're representations
yeah,
of of something that.
yeah, yeah. And so as this person back in 25,000 BCE was creating these horses, of course you had the image of the horse, but then the dots, there's something just unique about those, and you can just stare at it and go, was he tuning that? Because then you look at this and you see, oh, look at that, there's same thing, but then there's dots on the dials. So one thing about radionics, you mentioned, how do we harness that the power that you could say is what makes radionics work. Bashar, a channeled entity, people can take that as they want, but he mentioned that if you were to ask him, what is a radionics device? He would say it is your permission slip to create.
Mm-hmm.
He would say it's simply how you are allowing yourself to do what you think you need it, but you don't. But if it helps, then use it. Just realize it's a permission slip you're giving yourself to create.
It's also a permission slip. You're giving yourself to step aside from the creative process, to remove your identity, your ego, from what is going to take place when you put your body and your mind in gear and you start working. So you don't want to have yourself constantly praising yourself for what you're doing. You want to get that part of yourself out of the way and sort of get into the deeper, fulfilling aspects, whether it's a creative act or whether you're actually working as a healer with a device. I mean, anybody can see the value of being able to assign a function to the device, which is really them using the device. You see? So, but they take themselves out of it, therefore the device becomes, like I was saying about my hands, it moves the correct way, because suddenly now this big part of myself is missing. So if the doctor's using a scalpel, he doesn't want to be thinking about that. He wants to be able to make the right moves in the right time frame, right? So it's the same thing if you're working with a device like a radionic device and you're using it in the fashion that you've been taught, then you want to put yourself in the place where if there is such an energy that is coming through you into this device and being sent somewhere else, that it's a free-flowing operation.
And that makes sense because it reminds me of something Masaki Maegawa said. I hope I got his name right, Masaki Maegawa. If not, sorry, Masaki, who we had on the show, and he's the one who mentioned your book to me. Is he was saying one thing about radionics, the device, and of course there's many different types, of course. They can be strictly symbols, like the book that you mentioned.
Two-dimensional.
Yeah.
Two-dimensional.
Two-dimensional symbols. They can be, electronic devices. They can be powered, non-powered. But regardless, if you have your radionics device and then you put your intent into it and you tune it, you feel it and you tune that intent, then basically you've created a machine that does something that basically keeps broadcasting your intent And with that, you get out of the way. So like you're right, as you're saying, your ego and you and the how and all this, you're taking your ego, you're taking like your linear reality, you're taking yourself out of the picture, then only your intent remains as this machine, which just keeps creating, ultimately, you could say outside of time and space, and it just creates your intent without your ego being involved. So in a way, it's sort of a way to become nobody and allow just really the divine to create. It's a very mystical act.
I think you're right, but we don't want to make the mistake of overhyping the radionics device as an object or the diagram or whatever tool is being used to expedite whatever purpose one assigns to it. I think there is something to be explored there, but what I've seen is that most of the time radionics devices are used for healing. Some are used for agriculture. They can be, you can find, you can do a radionic transaction on a field of crops to remove pests. And this sounds totally voodoo, but it has been done. And that's what I write about in the book, some of the examples of this. You can use it to prevent bugs you can use it to strengthen your crops energetically to such an extent that predators will fly over your field and fly to a field that doesn't have the same defenses. See, this is all really magical stuff. You know, we're talking about no science here. But this is what the practitioners claim to do. These aren't my claims. These are what the inventors of the machines did with them. And you can believe it or not believe it. You can buy one and try it yourself. You can check it out. It's not entirely germane to what I'm talking about, because what I'm talking about is not a machine that will replace fertilizers in a field. I'm talking about an experience that will teach you about your own potential. You see? So when you look at it that way, your chisel and hammer becomes a radionic device, because you're removing the inertia of your own inhibitions, your own self-doubt. You're removing things through this hard analog process of simply sweating it out, trying to get something, turn a lump of stone into a beautiful form of some kind. There's a process by which you're transforming it, but it's transforming you. So in many instances of radionics, people don't care about that part of the equation. They care about being able to perform a miraculous event of some kind. And they do. From my experience, it can be done, but it can't necessarily be done by everyone, because not everyone at 5 years old can play a violin or write a symphony, and yet people have done it, right, in the past. There is tremendous genius that people are born with that gives them aptitudes and skills that a lot of people don't have. When somebody is born with these radionic aptitudes, then they can pick up something and they can perform acts that allow these forces to assemble themselves correctly and get the work done. So you're talking about going from something that's in the imagination, non-physical, this energy, we can't measure it. You can't measure anything coming out of a radionics device. It's not physical. But we're talking about doing work with it. We're talking about changing the pattern of a disease, or changing some of the dynamics in an agricultural setting or an animal. And so there's a link here between the intent side of this, which is non-physical, cerebral, and how do you get it into the physical world to where it actually does something? With a hammer, you hit the chisel and it hits the stone. It's really simple. Everybody understands it. But with this, there's another sort of immeasurable component, and that's what should be being discussed in relationship to the creative world, right? Because we produce paintings and sculptures and artworks and music to make money, right? It's a commodity. We sell it. We want to sell it. We want someone to like it. We want them to like us, right? But in many societies, the artists were the people who were able to move energy with what they did. That's what a shaman is. They weren't just making objects for retail customers. They might have people they were curing on a retail level, but their artwork had another dimension to it. So where did that dimension go in the modern world? With all these hundreds and thousands of artists out there in the world creating some incredible things, where is the knowledge that the shaman of the world had that allowed this other dimension to come in? Why aren't the artists using their skills to try recertification of forests? You see, there's there in the book. There's a picture of a radionics lab in Germany that was using radionics devices to recertify forests that had been damaged by pollution. So if somebody in Germany thought it was worth their while buying like a couple dozen expensive radionics devices and tuning them to a forest to try to recover and rejuvenate that forest's energy, why aren't artists using this equipment to do things for themselves and for their families and for their society? The farmers of America during the big desperate farming era of the 1970s and early 80s, when I first became aware of this technology, were going bust all over the Midwest. They didn't have money for fertilizers and pesticides and and medicines. They bought radionics devices. That's why there's radionics manufacturers today still in business, because they had a customer base that for purely economic reasons was looking at the alternatives to going broke. And one option they had was to use these devices. So all over the Midwest of the country today, there's an underground culture of veterinarians, farmers, people in agriculture, familiar with this equipment, who learned how to use it to save their enterprises, right? No glamour in that. It's just practical. So if I'm not lying about this, and these people really exist, then why shouldn't the creative people that have the money, they have the interest in their work, they have the extraordinary capacity to reach out and affect other people, why shouldn't they be utilizing this stuff, right? So when I wrote this book, it was not like, it's presented as a history of radionics. So someone reading it can see that every single radionics inventor of any note, that of the ones that I covered, and there's a lot I didn't cover, but of the ones I covered, They basically created their own technology. They created their own systems of using the technology, their own explanations, and their own procedures, which to me means they're artists, right? They're not using the same vials, and they're not using the same this, that, and the other thing that science requires. They're creating something original out of themselves, which in this case happens to be have a practical application. See? So if that's all true, then creative people should be interested in this, don't you think?
I think they should be, and I think they are. I mean, I'm definitely interested. And Erin, who, if we talk more tomorrow, she might hop on with us. You know?
Good.
Yeah. So it gives us a reason to keep going tomorrow, huh? Because then maybe we can get Erin on the call, and because she's a full-time artist. That's what she does, and she
likes
definitely
plants too.
Oh, she loves plants, obviously, and she has she's actually helping her artistic flow right now with Radionics, actually.
Mhm.
And she could tell you
I'd
about
like to
that.
hear about that. So she's doing what I'm saying people can do. Is that what you're telling me?
Yes, basically, I would let her describe it.
Yeah, let's have her describe it. Please bring her. Let's get her in this conversation.
I could. Well, she's not available right now, but we will bookmark that. I'll make a note.
Okay.
And we'll get her in on that, and she can talk about here's an artist who's using it to help in their creative expression.
Okay.
Because in a way, let's just say that you are creating something, a project. You're creating art, and let's say you have a block or a flow, or you just want to help that river flow. You can I would just say that Radionics can help that process, because the artist can find that they're either want to enhance what they're creating or they want to help with the flow. And then Radionics can become that machine that you're basically like your true inspiration for what you're creating can, like Radionics can help. How would you put it? Ultimately, that inspiration is the energy that Radionics is allowing, or you might say manipulating, or it's helping to help focus it. So I would let her try to describe it, because I think she definitely could better. But so there's an artist who's using Radionics to help in the process.
Well, just to clarify one thing here, I don't think we're talking. I think we can go in and talk about devices and techniques and tools and things like that. But right now we're talking about Radionics as a metaphor. We're talking about a metaphor here that is allowing people to open up themselves. And you can use a tool, and that's a different discussion. But the way your wife is using this is what I'm talking about. And therefore, we should ask her what that means. Rather than have me say it, I have my experience, right? I mean, that's part of what you want to talk about. But to hear someone else confirm it would be very, very nice for your listeners. And this is somebody I know. I don't know your wife. I don't know you. And this is all new to me, right? So you took an interest in this for your own reasons, and we're trying to find the seed of what it is we're talking about here. We're calling it radionics, but that's just a name. That's just a word, right?
It is just a metaphor, as you put it, a metaphor. Well, I look at it like, I'm always very humble. If I say I'm a musician, I always feel like I have to be much more accomplished to call myself a musician, right? But as a musician and playing guitar, one of the things that I think musicians have to go through, and I'm sure it's the same with, it doesn't really matter what medium you use. It can be carving a stone, it can be music. It's all just a medium. But in playing music, I've had times where you're just witnessing it, and you step back and you realize, especially when it's improvisational.
That's what I'm talking about. That
Yeah.
experience. You're describing it.
Yeah. So there was a while when I lived I lived in Louisville, Colorado, and used to go over to Boulder next door, and we used to play jazz. And we used to play, a lot of times we just go through the rhythms in Kind of Blue by Miles Davis and John Coltrane. And so those rhythms, you know, dun 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 dun, they're so amazing. And so you would just get your bass player to play that stand up bass, and the thing about jazz is it's just this beautiful, actually rather difficult rhythm. It makes you sweat. It makes you work out, because that time is hard to keep. And everyone just keeps it. And so you get in that groove, and you're like, you're sweating. It's hard. And then comes the moment where each person improvises for a while, you know, play within those scales and play. And that's what makes it interesting. And there are times when you just do it. Okay, I'm just going to do it. And you do it. But there's times when all of a sudden, just boom, something happens, and you're witnessing it, and you know it's just fantastic, and you're enjoying it, but you just witness it and you let it happen. And it's almost like you realize that it has nothing to do with you.
It's like a membrane. You cross the membrane, and suddenly you're in another state where you are not the doer, but you're witnessing what is being done through you.
Yeah.
That's what I believe happens to people that know how to operate a radionics device properly. It's just like you're describing. And
yes.
You see, that's why you can try it and try it and try it for a number of times. Nothing happens. Gradually, you get accustomed to it, because there is a learning curve. And at some point, there's just a white light experience like that. You're on the other side of the membrane, and that what is happening is happening. Now, artists experience that all the time, but the where it's going is into a creative product, right? It's going also into them, which is to their benefit. But I'm saying, look at some of these other things you can do with it, right? I'm not sure what they are yet. I think they remain to be invented.
I think so. Well, like in playing jazz, the thing was, I sort of learned that in those moments of inspiration, that it's like the musician's job is just to practice their technical skill. You just have technical skill, you have ability. You sort of make a clean path. It's like you're sweeping the path. And then when the inspiration comes, it's not inhibited by your sloppiness. So basically, to the ability that your technical skill is perfected. And that's basically allows that true inspiration to come through uninhibited. It can come through no matter what your skill level is, but the fun of becoming more technically skillful is that it's like you're widening that river. More can come through,
and you're taking possession of it. You're not in the way anymore. You're ready.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think it's something that, if musicians or artists do struggle with their egos, it's that there's just has to come to this point. You have to come to this point where you realize the best stuff you'll ever do, you didn't do. You just witnessed it. And so that's the thing. And you go, wow, but you can get better at when it happens, not screwing it up. You can you can just enjoy this river flowing through you and just go, I love it. This is wonderful. Oh yeah, that's just great. And you can enjoy it, because the moment your ego grabs it, it's gone.
Right.
And so that's one of the nice things about the radionics machine is that it gets your ego out of the way. So as you get that technical skill of tuning, of using it, you feel when you know you've got it, then you step back and that river of inspiration, it just flows. But you're not
Yeah.
there to mess it up. It's almost like tuning your Radionics machine, like having the closet, and once you get it, like don't look at it and close the door.
Right. Well, one way of looking at the technical side of radionics is if you imagine every form has a geometry inside of it. And if your body is a complete set of numerous nested geometries inside the organs and the tissues and the blood and everything else, and something comes in and ruptures that geometry, that's your disease. What a radionics practitioner would do is not so much treat the symptoms of that situation, but go back and try to reconstruct the geometry where it is broken down so that the body can perform the necessary healing on itself by creating the right chemicals in the bone marrow and bringing it to the places in the body that need that. Something has to be at the core of that process. There has to be like a center where this, and that's what I'm calling the geometry. So if you as a practitioner were able to operate on that level, then it's like you're at the center of the onion, and you change the thing at a very, very subtle level, and things start changing that are nested around it. That's one of the metaphors that I've been given to understand about why it's important to get to to understand the nature of how the device works. You're not working with the physical reality of the person's body. You're working with something inside that, which can be approached with your consciousness, with your intention, but it can't be approached entirely from the outside in the same way at all. I don't know if that's a little too cryptic, but
no, actually, it really isn't. It really isn't. And I'm gonna let me grab something that I think will help elaborate on that. It's over here.
Sure. What causes the spontaneous remission from disease? It's established medical fact. Spontaneous remission. I have a friend who's experienced this 3 times, extraordinarily so. Doesn't exactly know why it's happening, but it does happen. It's logged in medical journals. So something must be there to do that. Do you follow what I'm saying? There must be some mechanism in the universe that allows for a spontaneous remission of disease.
Oh, there absolutely is, because it happens. And there's actually someone we're going to have on the show, let's see, Tuesday, Aline, oh gosh, what's her last name? Oh gosh, I forget. But she's written an amazing book recently. She's kind of a pioneer in, actually, let me grab it real quick. Hold on one second. I think this will help elaborate on spontaneous remission. One sec. I'm gonna go grab something. That's the star of the show there. The
I see.
cat.
I'm looking at her. She's quite beautiful.
Yeah. She pretty much runs the show. She
You're the puppet.
Oh, I am. She's actually, she's the alien cat, as we show her. She's, as we call her. So Aline Day McCusick, And she wrote this amazing book. And then so one thing,
Sounds like radionics.
it actually is a form in a way, because so she found through her study of sound healing that, of course, I will find it. Where's the diagram? That basically our etheric body, our plasma body, basically our energy body, our toroidal, energy body. She's kind of mapped it. Basically, she found that, oh, look, here's what the different distances and areas mean, and then she goes through the chakra centers and like the left and the right side of them, how that the effects that has, what that means, and ultimately, like here in the appendix, can't seem to find the picture here, so I won't hold this up. But basically, she mapped the etheric energy, or like the plasma energy, the biosphere, as we're calling it, of the body, and the size, the distance, etc., and what each layer means. And then you actually tune. You have tuning forks, and so when you have your tuning fork, you might hear that. It's a very deep rumble this thing makes. So you go around the person's etheric, or you say biosphere, and when you find something in it, especially depending on where it is it like the throat chakra, the crown, the heart chakra, and what side, front or back, she kind of found that it seemed to have a geometry where certain traumas, certain issues existed in the same spot for most people. And so you could look at the let's just say your throat chakra. So on the right side, speaking but not being heard, and then on the left side, that which we do not express. And so she found that when you find these blocks there, and the thing is, here's the thing about how that I think this kind of corresponds, is that when you're working with that biosphere, as we call it, around a person's body, and it really shocked me the first time I did it, and of course you get better at it, but when you're actually doing that and you're going through their biosphere and you feel it and you hit something, it just stops. It's just like it when in radionics, when you're using a stick pad, and you get a stick, it just goes, it's like you would think you ran into something if you had your eyes closed, and there's an energy right there in the biosphere of the body. And then as you get better intuitively, you can feel what it is, when it happened. And even if you don't know necessarily what it was, you can take it and you can begin clearing it out, and you can take it and you can toss it back into the corresponding chakra, and you can help fan it out. Then the person can process it, even if they know what it was or not. And so I thought that might correspond some to, what you're saying about spontaneous remission, because there's so much that exists that we don't know exists. Like for me, through the practice of doing it some now, the biosphere tuning, the tuning fork tuning, healing, I just know it works, because when you start practicing it and you work with somebody's biosphere and you find something, a person has to experience it. Basically, I don't know how else to put it, but when you find something in that biosphere, it's going to stop the fork. You're going to feel it. And not only that, it will change the tone of the fork. So you have your fork nice and resonating, and you'll hear this, you'll actually feel it, you run into something, and then it actually changes.
It'll actually stop the tuning on the fork. It
will change it. Because it has a strong frequency, and you'll get to be able to tell, oh, that's the best way to put it. It's like if you have two guitars on each side of the room, and you like play one string on one and the other one tends to resonate. The best way of putting it is like, imagine something that it sounds like dissonance, if you're familiar with that. So you have two notes that don't sound right together. That's what it feels like. So you've run into dissonance and you go, oh, this isn't right. And then you can start to just, and basically you feel it and you can start to clear that. You can start to remove that dissonance and then remove that blockage. And the thing is, you can find that you're running into ancestral stuff within people. Like they might have something which is like ancestral trauma. It's not even theirs, but it's in their energy field. And then you can actually begin to work with it and clear it and toss it, and then they can let it go.
Let me say something.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me say something to all the people that consider all of this just complete mumbo jumbo and without merit. Do you know about the placebo effect? Do you know the placebo effect is being studied in great depth today? Why? Right? Now, in a placebo test, you have a chemical that you believe is going to cure or affect positively a condition, a medical condition. So you have a group of people you give that chemical to, and you have another group of people you give a sugar pill to, and the sugar pill is the placebo. And what you want to do is find out how much better your designer drug is than the placebo, which has nothing in it at all, right? So we're talking about the worst case scenario for a radionic device or a tuning with, like your friend is doing, is that it does nothing at all. That's the worst case scenario. So that's the placebo pill. Now, the odd thing is that in the study of placebos, cures, is that, first of all, it's very, very hard to design a drug that's better than a placebo, right? That's one of the things they found out first. That's why it's so expensive to develop the drugs, because they have to beat the placebo. So what happens when a person takes a placebo? Well, depending on the condition, maybe on average 30% of the people get better with a placebo. Now, understand what I'm saying. They're getting better simply because they took a white sugar pill, but they believed that it was a new breakthrough chemical for their condition, right? Now, even if you tell them they're taking a placebo, they still get better, right? So figure that one out, right? So what I'm saying here is that if you're sick and you go to a healer, someone with a tuning fork or someone with a radionics device, and in the end, it's not any better than a placebo, you still have a 30 to 60% chance of getting better just because it's a placebo, right? Because the mechanism that we're talking about, whatever it is, worked on its own without the benefit of a chemical analog, right? So that, if I wave a feather over you and I tell you, Craig, you're going to get better, you're going to feel much better tomorrow, right? You've got a much better chance of feeling better tomorrow than the guy who said, no, I'm not going to do it. Right? That's what's interesting about this. And that is why this is being studied through the back door in science.
There was an episode of MASH. I'm sure everyone has heard that TV show. And there was this one episode where they had run out of morphine. Like for some reason, whatever, they had run out and they didn't have morphine. They wouldn't have it for a couple of days. And so what they did was they basically just said, they told everybody, they said, oh, you know, we got this super strong morphine in and it's a little bit too much. So we're just going to give you this little bit and you just tell us if it's too much because then we'll back off. You know, we're just letting everybody know this morphine is off the chart. So we're just giving you a little bit. Are you feeling okay? And it was an episode of MASH about that. And I remember, it's funny how you remember those things I remembered I was, pretty young when I saw that, and it always stuck with me forever. I just went, yeah,
Yeah.
that's real. I was a little
Yeah.
kid, and I was like, I know it. That's real. I know it.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So we'll definitely, I will get Erin to hop in tomorrow a bit, and we'll definitely ask her about her radionics experience and how it's helping her, or not, or the placebo, or, and we talked about some good stuff so far. So, your book, The Secret Art, and, for it really struck me. And let me see, can I find, there was one little section here, just as we're talking about the book, maybe as we start to shift gears a little bit, I'll just read this one little section I thought was very good, this paragraph, that kind of maybe sums up using the machine, even though we're trying to transcend it, use it as a metaphor. It said, subtle radiations speak to us in different language. No, sorry. Subtle radiations speak to us in a different language than the voice in our head. More often, they are squelched by the louder voices of need and desire. The subtle stream of impressions that guide creative activity are, to me, comparable to the impressions that guide a radionics practitioner to turn dials and look for a sticky sensation on his or her fingers while dowsing a rate. As in radionics, as in the radionics process, moving my hands around the surface of a sculpture I was carving became a completely new way of understanding reality. So, maybe at heart, the secret art, which you're kind of getting across in radionics, and ultimately the source of it, that inspiration that the artist knows. And it really struck me in the very beginning of the book. This device, quite an old device and beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody put so much effort at that time into making it beautiful. And you can tell the beauty of this device was important.
That's in the British Museum, by the way.
Oh, I'd love to go see that, because it's quite amazing. And so, radionics devices, as I think you mentioned in a lecture that you did, that they're kind of training wheels for our creative
That was
ability.
William Tiller.
That was William Tiller?
Yeah, it's one of the few scientists that's actually studied radionics as a field, and as a physiologist, looked at what do these things do, if anything. What do these machines do? What does the operator do? What's the connection between the operator and the machine and the patient? And he came out saying that they were training wheels for the mind, which meant that the mind of the operator was learning a sequential series of new tasks by employing the device in a systematic way, arriving at a diagnosis and arriving at a treatment through what you learn as you learn how to operate the device. So it's a procedure. You have to do it, but it's not a procedure that's being necessarily conducted by a machine. It's conducted by a machine that's connected to your consciousness. And it's an argument that people have been having for a long time. How much is it the machine? How much is it the consciousness? And people that value the machine component of this will tell you that the better made the machine, the better the results. And it's true. I mean, when you look at how well crafted the great radionics devices are, many of them, you realize that there's something to this, just like there's the same thing with a good tool versus a poor tool. It does have some effect on it. It has some effect on you when you use it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. And it's something that strikes me about the devices is when we look at them historically. Well, for one thing, what gets me is how they were available in the past, like the auto class. This little device is amazing that you have a picture of in the book.
Yeah.
And it's obvious there's an aspect of artistic expression in the creation of just that box. And then when you see it then of course you get into the, there it is in action.
So people are,
and how this, yeah, go ahead.
I don't know how much time you would like me to spend on this, but people looking at these things are going to be saying, what the hell, what is really going on? In order to answer that question, I have to go back to the very beginning of this technology and how it was discovered. Actually, I don't know if you want that discussion in the middle of all this, because it's kind of, I'm not even sure I can do it justice, but I think it'd
be, no, I think it'd be great to go into, because we could kind of, I would just mention a radionics device. I'm sure people have, I'll have to do a little intro to this so people can have a better idea. But, you know, radionics device, I would just say you've got your input and your output, your source and your target. And so let's just say for agriculture, you would say, I'm going to take an aerial picture of this field. I'm going to put it there on the source. And no, that would be the target. Then on the source, let's say...
wait. Let me stop you, because you're going to make people very confused.
Yeah, actually, no, I probably shouldn't describe it right now. Maybe, yeah.
There is a way into this that is comprehensible, but looking at it from a procedural point of view, as the devices are designed today, it's just going to seem like madness.
Yeah, so actually, let me just skip that part. Let's just toss that out. And yeah, let's go into what you were going to say. And we could talk about that for a bit tonight. Then that could kind of be a great place to like wrap up.
Yeah.
Maybe part one. I'll try to drag Aaron in tomorrow. And then tomorrow we could talk about Dragonline Studios. And we could talk about the music that you've made. And it'd be great. Okay.
Well, the inventor of radionics was a famous doctor of his time. He was credited with legitimate medical discoveries, Albert Abrams. And he also was at the very beginning of electronics. Electronic technology was just beginning to be understood, right? So in those days, and I'm old enough to remember what it was like to be percussed. A doctor would tap the organs of your body with his finger and listen to the sound that he heard. If the organ sounded funny, right, then that was a signal to him to look further and to examine more about that particular organ. And this is a very old technique called percussing. So it has to do with the physical contact of the doctor's hand to the body of the patient and an audio signal that comes out of it. So what Abrams discovered was that at one point this was the Victorian era. Women did not like to undress in front of their doctors so that they could be percussed. So he discovered that if he got a very healthy young man and put him in one room and ran wires from that man's hands over to the patient, the female patient in the other room, she would hold two wires and the young man would hold the other ends of the two wires, that he could percuss the young man and get the same readout he would as if he were touching the woman without her being undressed, right? So something about her physiology translated into this healthy young man. So even though he didn't have a problem with his liver, and she did, when he hit his liver with his finger, it made the incorrect sound that told him there was a problem there, right? It sounds so simple. How does that go through a wire? I can't tell you. But this is what he discovered. He was a physiologist. So it wasn't long before he realized that if he cut that wire, right, and he put a capacitor on that wire, which meant that round dial thing that I showed at the beginning, with each one of those dots was a metal plate, and the dial was simply the other side of the capacitor looking at the rate. He found that he could specify more about the nature of the diseased organ through assigning it a rate, an arbitrary numerical rate. So if he's tapping, if he's percussing the patient and he's moving the dial, that if he gets a 3, before the sound stops or before he reaches the point where he feels he's gone, which is became the stick on the stick plate, he began to see that he could make a correspondence between a numerical rate and a sound and a condition in a body remotely being detected through 2 wires. Now that sounds like a lot to take in, it is. But that's how this weird technology began. It had a purely scientific base according to the science of that time, and it maintained that scientific credibility for a great many years before it became widely discredited for other reasons. But this is something that emerged in a creative process, a doctor's creative process of solving a problem of his patient not wanting to get undressed, understanding that there was some strange reaction that took place that could be transmitted across a wire, and then interrupting that wire, first to diagnose and later on to treat. And that's more of a discussion that what we can have at this sitting. But it's described in the book adequately. And that's where this began. It didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of science, the science of the early 20th century, and the beginnings and origins of the use of electricity in medical appliances. So it has a rationale.
No, that's great. And that is in the book. There's pictures of that and such, and so a person can get a deeper understanding of that from reading The Secret Art, definitely. Well, we've talked about a good deal of things so far tonight, and I don't want to keep you too long. I know it's late where you're at, but when it comes to applied radionics, one thing I just wanted to mention 2 quotes that I saw in your book that I think really struck me. One is the human mind is innately equipped with the ability to pre-engineer a future reality through delivery of vibratory information back to the energetic realm through the process of focused intent. And ultimately those little machines, those symbols that do things, that to me somewhat grasps radionics, or is an aspect of that has value. And then also you said in the book, the universe is a symphony of living energy that sings out to a cosmos far greater than the physical realm we perceive as reality. So, I mean, it really is the, radionics. It evolved from what you just said, and it really is, I would say, our little intent machine of kind of modern day magic. And like you're saying, we have only sort of scratched the surface. We don't necessarily know where it's going. We haven't understood it completely yet by far. But it's a great path. I mean, like, it's one of the things that I realized, reading the book, definitely, that it's a path that you've been going down. Like when you transcend the machine itself and you're just realizing, wow, ultimately this is harnessing inspiration, but it's one thing I believe in the book that you did mention was ultimately, people go beyond the need for the machine itself. People who were doing healing, I believe, were
Yeah, I mean, they're
it,
hands-on healers, don't use any machines.
yeah, and so that's the thing. It's that you ultimately have you felt that? I guess it's kind of obvious, but have you, that's been your experience where always what was on the other side of the radionics board was speaking to you and saying, hey, I'm here, check it out. And so you've really been you've been beyond the board, for quite a while, figuring out the mystery behind it.
Well, I just want to finish by saying that my experiences are the experience of not of a scientist or an engineer, but as an artist. I experience the world in that, using that language. I'm not a mathematician. I can't use those symbols. But I do, I did follow an empirical and experiential path to the point where I was confident that I could make some of these extreme declarations. At one point, I was helped very much by the late R.J. Reynolds III, who was a tremendous endorser of this technology and others like it. He had a shotgun approach to helping inventors that could not get funded by any other means, through scientific grants or anything. They were just too far out to obtain any kind of support from any normal organization. But Reynolds would give them money, right? Small grants. And towards the end of his life, I helped him with this. At one time, we were out at his farm called Devotion in Western North Carolina. It's a very famous place. It was a subject of a movie at one time about his family. And living in one of the buildings out there was a very odd character, who was a doctor who had spent his entire life studying paranormal healing. Andrei Puharich. There's a movie being made about him now. And Puharich was quite old at this time, and he was living with a young woman. And when we went over to see him, I was introduced to her that she was a healer. And she was basically there keeping Andre like going. I said, how does that work for you, Andre? He said, well, he said that one thing she does really well is get rid of these wrinkles. So I said, this is too good to be true. I said to her, lovely person, I said, I'm only now in my, I think, 30s. And I said, ever since I was like 20 years old, I've suffered from chronic back pain. I mean, lifting stones and things like that, it's easy to throw your back out if you don't know what you're doing. Stress will do it too. So anyway, I was periodically just terribly overwhelmed by lower back pain. She said, let me see if I can help. Sit down in this chair. So I sat down in the chair. She took my shoes off. She started massaging my feet, and boom, I was gone, right? I was gone. I mean, I was just like sound asleep. And when I came to, I said, wow, that was great. I had no idea whether she'd done anything or not, right? But I guarantee you, for the next 25 years, I did not throw my back out, right? And a lot of stuff went on in that time. I lifted a lot of heavy objects. And whatever she did, however I received it, it was direct experience. And Andre knew she was good because he spent his whole life introducing people like Uri Geller and Peter Hurkos to the world. They all came through Andre. And so he knew what was real, what wasn't when it came to this world. And he was a medical doctor and a nut job, but he was a great one. And so I can say this stuff works. I wouldn't be talking about it to you and telling other people about it if I didn't think there was something to it. And I'm as skeptical as anyone else. I want to know how, I want to know why, I want to know, what can it do for me, right? So let's just leave it there for now, as far as what I have to say tonight.
I love it. That's great. Well, no, I understand what you mean, because how does somebody know it is real or not? Well, when they experience it, they'll know that it is, I guess is the best way to put it. Like for me, working with tuning fork, it sounds
Yeah.
crazy, and I get it. And if somebody goes, I don't care what people think, whether they believe it or not, enough people do. And the thing is, if there was any desire that I have to get it for people to believe it who do not, is that you can help people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when people are like, oh, I've got this or they've got that, you gain that ability to see, and you can feel it. And so you use a tuning fork. The one thing is, I know that already, as a novice, I guess you could say, I use it, but I know that's only a training wheels. That's only a permission slip. Eventually I won't need it. I might still use it, but to some extent, as some have said, that they use the forks for the people, because it helps them have a feeling of validity.
Yeah, and it's very literal.
Yeah.
It's a very visceral, literal demonstration of something that they can believe in.
Yes, and then that helps them. It helps everything flow better. Well, yeah, well, definitely, we have some more things to talk about. I will get Erin. I will get her in the conversation tomorrow a bit, when we talk again, when we can get this set up. But I'll let people know so that they tune into episode 2, is things that we're going to talk about. Dragonline Studio, where, as Duncan has put it, powerful things happen there. And there's definitely some pictures. I'll post them of it. It is an amazing spot. And when you see Dragonline Studio and you see the amazing radionics work, when you see, and we will talk about it, the purr generator, something that I was instantly reminded of when I saw the purr generator and the work you guys are doing at Dragonline Studios, and also the sonification of nature intelligence. You guys made music with rocks, for real rock music. It is amazing things happened there. So that's going to be part 2. And when I looked at pictures of Dragonline Studio, and I looked at the pictures of you guys creating music, and you guys using the purr generator, the purr machine, all the amazing equipment that you've collected over time. You have amazing, like, as far as the Radionics Museum, you got to see Duncan's place. There's some amazing stuff he's collected. It reminded me of the X-Files. My favorite part of the X-Files, I really think the best part of the show, was the lone gunman. If you're familiar with that, there was in the X-Files, and they were in the first, like the pilot episode they were in, and they were only going to be like in there for the pilot episode. But fan feedback, people were like, "We love them, we want them." So you see the X-Files throughout. I mean, you see the lone gunman once in a while throughout the X-Files, and they were these 3 guys, these rather strange characters, and they were sort of like techno hacker, magician, shamans, and they just had this place that looked like Duncan's Dragonline Studio, but it was all more computery and not so much radionics. And the thing about it is, when you have a really great workshop, it's a place that people just want to be. They want to go. They go, "Oh my gosh, that looks so amazing." So the lone gunman of radionics, Duncan Laurie, Dragonline Studio. We're going to deep dive into that, because it's
I'm
just...
I'm going to have a hard time living this down. Let me tell you.
Yeah, because I tell you, it's phenomenal. And I will, when we talk about that, And of course, in this episode too, I'll post some pictures, some links to that. Anyway, it's been great, Duncan. We will wrap this up here, and we got part 2 coming. I'll get Aaron in to talk some, so we can get a real, an artist. Definitely, we'll get Aaron in here, and we will have some fun. It's been so great talking. Thank you for your time. And is there anything else?
It's been a lot of fun. Nobody wants to hear any of this stuff. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I think more people want to hear about it than you think.
Well, thank you. God bless you for giving it to them, man.
All right. Well, thank you. And we'll talk soon. Okay. Bye-bye.
Perfect. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You are listening to Radiant Creators, a collaborative project composed of people whose passion, purpose, and dedication requires forging their own unique path of empowerment and livelihood. A radiant creator isn't making a living, they are living.